So what if I told you there was a map, not to some buried treasure, but to the deepest, most hidden parts of yourself? A map that was drawn up centuries ago by alchemists, not to turn lead into actual gold, but to transform the human soul. Well, today, we're going to follow that map. It's a guide, one that's been rediscovered by modern psychology, for a journey into the huge, hidden world that exists inside every single one of us. You know, this quote just nails it, right? It perfectly captures our everyday reality. We swim through life, pushed and pulled by currents we don't even see, shaped by a world we don't consciously feel. That water, that's our unconscious. It's this vast inner world of drives and instincts and untapped potential that basically dictates so much of who we are. And yet, most of the time, it's completely invisible to us. And that, right there, is the big question for our journey today. What happens when the fish actually starts to notice the water? What happens when we turn our focus away from the world outside to the universe within? Honestly, this is the very first step on any real path of transformation. All right, so our first stop on this journey is all about recognition. It's the simple, but actually pretty profound act of just acknowledging that this inner world even exists, that there's a universe inside you that's just as real and just as complex as the one out there. Now, what's so cool here is this idea of the deep psyche. This isn't just some dusty attic for old memories. No, it's a living, breathing ecosystem. The source material says it has its own life, its own intelligence. It's a realm of non-egoic potentials. So what does that mean? Think of it like this. It's all the hidden talents, the deep intuitions, the versions of yourself that exist beyond the everyday you that you think you are. It's the raw, untapped potential of who you could become. But just knowing this inner world is there, that's just the beginning. I mean, if you look at any great myth, any hero's journey, they all tell us the same thing. To find the treasure, you don't get to just fly up into the heavens. First, you have to go down. You have to descend into the underworld. And psychologically, that means taking a journey into our own shadow. The alchemists had a name for this stage, the nigredo, or the blackening. It's that moment when everything seems to fall apart. Our beliefs, self-image, the world we've carefully built. But here's the key. This isn't a failure. The alchemists saw this chaos, this messy confrontation with our own darkness, as the absolute, non-negotiable first step. You have to dissolve the old before you can build something new. So what does this darkness actually look like in psychological terms? Well, the sources give us this really powerful concept, the lower self. And notice that wording. It's the creative center of our negativity. It's not just a void. It's an active, powerful pattern of energy, fueled by pride and fear, that operates just below our awareness. And it effectively builds an interior prison that we don't even realize we're living in. And this isn't just some abstract theory. The lower self builds this fortress to protect our ego, and it uses all these tools you see here. Things like denial, just pretending a problem doesn't exist, or projection, pointing the finger and blaming everyone else for our own stuff. You know, whenever we act out in anger because we feel out of control, well, that's the lower self pulling the levers, trying desperately to avoid the hard work of actually looking at ourselves. And this just illustrates it perfectly. Here's a real journal entry showing this process in action. The frustration, the anger, it all erupts in this outburst. It's the lower self acting out. And you can see the self-awareness kicking in afterward. Not a very wise choice. This is a perfect, real-world snapshot of that nigredo moment. But here's the good news. In this inner underworld, the hero is never really alone. Once we've dared to face the darkness, we start to find that the psyche itself has its own sources of wisdom, its own guides. The next stage is all about learning how to listen. This is a pretty mind-blowing statement from Carl Jung himself. During his own intense journey inward, he met this inner figure he called Philemon. And what he realized was absolutely critical. Philemon wasn't just him talking to himself. This was an autonomous, wise force within his own psyche, an inner guru. And that discovery is a key landmark on our map. So how did Jung have these conversations? He developed a technique for it called active imagination. And this is not just daydreaming, okay? It's a focused, conscious dialogue with these non-ego images, the figures like Philemon that bubble up from the deep psyche. It's basically a way of asking your deepest self a question and then having the courage to just be quiet and listen for the answer. And get this, what's really fascinating is that this psychological process is tied to our actual physiology. This table shows that these deep conversations happen best in what it calls liminal states. You know, those borderlands between being awake and being asleep, in the theta and alpha brainwave ranges. These are the sweet spots, the fertile ground for deep insights, creative breakthroughs, and what the source calls psychic perception. You know, those sudden flashes of intuition that just seem to come out of nowhere. Okay, so we've entered the inner world, we've faced the shadow, and we've found a guide. Now we come to the center of the labyrinth, the most challenging and honestly the most rewarding stage of this entire alchemical process, the union of opposites. The alchemists called this the conjunctio, or the sacred marriage. Psychologically, this is all about integration. It's the really hard work of taking all the fundamental opposites inside of us, our logical mind and our deep unconscious, our rational side and our intuition, our goodness and our shadow, and finding a way for them to not just coexist, but to actually work together instead of being at war. And I love this because it shows you just how timeless this whole process is. The alchemists saw these opposites as characters. Sol, the Sun King, that's the bright, logical, conscious mind. And Luna, the Moon Queen, the dark, mysterious, intuitive world of the unconscious. Their sacred marriage is exactly what modern psychology just calls integration. The words have changed, but the deep human truth is exactly the same. Jung's inner guide, Philemon, took this idea even further. He explained that some of the most powerful opposites we have to unite aren't even really ours. He called them superhuman daemons that possess us, huge forces like spirituality and sexuality. Think of them less like personal traits and more like gravity or electricity. They're powerful currents that run through all of humanity. We don't own them. We just have to learn how to navigate them. And look at how this deep inner need for union shows up in our day-to-day lives. This journal entry talks about wanting a relationship that's harmonized, that's receptive. This isn't just about finding the right person on a dating app. It's an outer reflection of the soul's deep, deep yearning for its own inner sacred marriage, its own conjunctio. So after that descent into the shadow and the hard work of uniting the opposites, the hero's journey still isn't done. The final and maybe most critical stage is the return. It's all about bringing that treasure you found in the depths back into the daylight of your everyday life. The final alchemical stage is called the rubedo, or the reddening. This symbolizes the moment the Philosopher's Stone is finally created. And psychologically, it represents achieving a new, stable state of wholeness. We're not talking about perfection here, but a kind of dynamic balance, where the light and the shadow, the conscious and the unconscious, are finally working together as a team. And this right here, this is absolutely the most important takeaway. The whole point of all this grueling inner work isn't to become some enlightened hermit who just sits around contemplating their navel. The goal is to bring this new integrated awareness back into the world, to actually change how you live, how you breathe, how you interact with everyone around you. The modern word for this is embodiment. It's this recognition that all these spiritual or psychological insights are pretty much meaningless until they become a felt reality in your body. It's when that transformation moves from being just an idea in your head to a fundamental shift in your posture, your presence, and how you actually perceive the world. This final journal entry just captures that strange, subtle feeling of embodiment perfectly. The author is noticing this shift from chasing after flow states to just having a more constant awareness of consciousness itself. And notice that paradox. The change happens on the inside, but they feel it more on the outside. It's kind of weird, right? Well, that's integration in action. The inner and outer worlds just aren't so separate anymore. You know, the alchemists had this belief that the Philosopher's Stone, the inner gold, was hidden in the most rejected, despised, and worthless material. This whole journey suggests that the exact same thing is true for us. The greatest treasures, wisdom, vitality, wholeness, they're waiting for us in the parts of ourselves we usually ignore or are even afraid of. So the only real question left is, are you brave enough to start digging?